Would it surprise you that the British Museum has singled out one religion to have its own special gallery above any other?
Sounds very discriminated.
Really?
Yeah. There's no gallery
What about the others?
for the Christian faith, there's no gallery for the Jewish faith, there's no gallery for the Hindu faith, the Sikh faith.
That's a bit weird.
I mean, I guess I have two thoughts on that. The first is, I guess you can make the argument as far as separating Islam out from the ancient Middle East, that because of the drastic artistic changes that you see with the Islamic, the Arab invasion of the rest of the Middle East and the change towards sort of really real calligraphy-based art.
Culturally speaking, that's the basis of most science and math was started by Islamic, so
Yeah.
most of that Middle Eastern, which of course was then wiped out by the Crusades, but that's probably the basis for that.
Where did you get that information?
History books.
History.
Yeah.
And are you not aware of the Byzantine Christian culture and its development of mathematics and science?
How about this? Let me
was
ask you a question.
translated
What's
into
this video
Arabic?
for?
One of the things that we said that we would try to do this year is to bring stories that are connected to the topic of Islam and Christianity, but outside of Speaker's Corner. And one of the first things that we want to do is to talk about the British Museum and its presentation of history. If you remember in one of our previous talks, we talked about the need for Christians to remember their own history and to have a sense of their own history and to tell their story and not allow others to tell their story for them. We've come to the British Museum because the British Museum, for some perplexing reason, has decided that out of all the world's religions, only one will have a unique and special gallery dedicated to its contribution to the world. And you can guess which religion that is. We've got here a map of the British Gallery, and we'll show you in photos the listing of the rooms. Every part of the world has its own particular section, but what you'll also notice is that despite the fact that every part of the world, from Africa, Americas, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece and Rome, Asia, Europe, Middle East, all have their own areas, only one religion gets its own specific gallery, which is that one. Now, I in no way begrudge the fact that the British Museum seeks to show the contribution of the Islamic faith to the world. The contribution is vast, and anyone who's taken time to study history would recognise that. But what I do have a problem with is that the British Gallery doesn't have a room that's dedicated to the Christian faith. Or if you're a Hindu, I might imagine that you might have a problem with the fact that there isn't one dedicated to the Hindu faith, or to the Jewish faith, or to the Sikh faith. And one has to wonder why the British Museum has taken such pains to develop rooms dedicated solely to talking about the contribution of Islam to the world, but no other faith. I find that perplexing. I went into the gallery a few weeks ago and was somewhat perplexed as to why a gallery that was said to be talking about Islam through history, the art of Islam and the history of Islam, barely gives any reference or any acknowledgement to the Islamic slave trade. Now, I was unable today to check whether if in the European galleries that talk about European history to the 1700s and 1800s, how the slave trade is dealt with there, and it might actually be that there's parity in terms of an absence of discussion of the European slave trade. I don't want to suggest anything else, but I do find it confusing that the British Museum has whitewashed the representation of the Islamic contribution to the world by only highlighting the positives and ignoring the negatives, or in some ways and in some respects completely misrepresenting historical facts. So one example would be, and takes us onto that theme about why Christians need to remember our own history and to tell our own story. Because if we don't tell our own history from our own identity, based upon our own historical experiences, and we allow others, like the liberal progressives that dominate at the British Museum, to tell our story for us, they will tell it wrong, they will tell it badly. So I went to check the medieval European history to try to do some kind of comparative, on the basis that there was no gallery dedicated to Christianity that I could go and check. Interestingly, when I asked at the information desk to be sent to the room where I could learn about the birth of Christianity, as I had learned about the birth of Islam within the Islamic gallery, they sent me to the room that was talking about Roman Britain. Now, I don't understand for my life why I was sent to a room about Roman Britain rather than, say, a room on first century Palestine. Furthermore, since the history of Christianity is touched upon in numerous rooms within the gallery, within the British Museum, but not in a specific Christian gallery, one has to question why the artifacts connected to Islamic history were not simply dispersed in and amongst the geographical areas of their concern, so the Arabian Peninsula, the Iranian Peninsula, the Indian Asian subcontinent peninsula. Why this special focus, this special concentration? And in terms of the representation of Christian history, I found troubling some of the placards that had the stamp of the authority of the British Museum in how it tells my history as a Christian. So this is what it says about the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of Christian military pilgrimages directed against Muslim-controlled territories in the Holy Land. Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade in 1095. In time, participants were offered the full remission of sin, which would ensure that every crusader had a place in heaven. Jerusalem was captured in 1099, and 4 Christian states were eventually established at Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa, and Tripoli. From these centres, Christian influence was exerted over part of the Eastern Mediterranean for nearly 200 years. The fall of the city of Acre to the Muslim forces in 1291 saw an end to the Christian rule in any part of the Holy Land. Now, at a very veneer surface level, that would all seem to be accurate, but what I find interesting is the way that it seems to present the Crusades as some kind of act of Christian aggression, when in reality, anyone who's looked at the history of the Crusades will know that they were a response to nearly 500 years of Islamic aggression, and they continued for 200 years in response to an additional 200 years of Islamic aggression. So in fact the Crusades were a response to 700 years of Islamic aggression. Now, in the same small section that talks about the Crusades, we have an icon of St. George and the youth of Mytilene, in which the description underneath states the following. The icon depicts a legend about a Christian youth enslaved by Muslims on the island of Crete. As the boy was about to serve his master a glass of wine, he was miraculously rescued by St. George and transported back to his homeland. He is shown here behind the saint, still holding the glass. The subject matter was popular with Christians as a piece of anti-Muslim propaganda. The icon, though resembling those produced in the Byzantine period, has certain Western European features and may have been produced by a French artist working in the Crusade states. Now, There's no doubt that during the Crusades, Christians definitely participated in anti-Muslim propaganda. I have no problem with the British Museum representing that fact because it's true. What I found interesting, though, is when I went into the Islamic gallery, there was virtually no mention of the concept of Islamic jihad, no description of it. There was no description of the aggressions made by the Muslim community against the Christians from the 7th century. No, I do apologise. I just remembered actually. There is mention of the aggression made by Muslims against the Christians. However, it's not put in terms of jihad. The religious connotation is removed, and it is spoken simply in terms of the kind of historical empires that the British Museum talks completely about. But when it's talking about the Crusades, it puts in the religious factor. But it also talks about anti-Muslim propaganda, which is fact. But there's no mention of the anti-Christian propaganda within the Islamic gallery. So the British Museum is presenting, by accident, I will give them the benefit of the doubt. I think this has probably just not been well thought out, that the curators of the different galleries are different people, perhaps they don't meet together. I really am wanting to give the British Museum all the benefit of the doubt. But by accident it would appear that they are representing Christians as bad and Muslims as wholly good. And we see that further in where they talk about Christian-occupied Spain, known as Andalusia. It says on its display, parts of Spain were under Islamic rule from about AD 711 to 1492. Sicily too was largely governed by Muslim rulers from around 965 to 1091. Islamic rule was generally characterized by religious tolerance. Now this is completely factually false. The reality is that the Muslims invaded Christian lands. They forbade Christians to practice their faith according to the cultural customs of their time. They permitted Muslims to enslave Christians, but Christians couldn't hold Muslim slaves. They permitted Christian women to marry Muslim men, but forbade Muslim women to marry Christian men. They passed laws such as meaning that if a Muslim killed a Muslim, they had to pay the full blood money, whereas if a Christian was killed by a Muslim, he would only have to pay half blood money. If you converted to Islam, that was acceptable, but if you left Islam and became a Christian, you would be punished by death. The ringing of bells was forbidden. Churches were desecrated. Laws were passed that prohibited Christian churches to be built higher than Muslim buildings or to have entrances onto the main streets. They had to use back alleyways. Christians had to pay a jizya tax in which they were ritualistically abused in the payment thereof. Christians were often entrapped and in terms of being asked to say controversial things under the promise of protection, and then if they weren't, they were killed for it, such as the martyrs of Cordoba. And yet the British Museum is saying that it was characterized by religious tolerance. This was not religious tolerance. The British Museum is lying. What actually happened was Christians were subject to a system called dimitude and made into second-class citizens. Now, I can only assume that the British Museum, when it states things like this, is allowing the concerns of 21st century politics to whitewash and to decide its interpretation of the history that is its concern. And I find that most troubling. Because the fact of the matter is, as most of these people are tourists, they're not going to be historians who've done any learning on history. They're going to be going into the British Museum and receiving an impression about the history that is false. And it's the British Museum that's doing it. This venerable institution that has a great place in my own heart, a great place in our culture, is prostituting itself to political correctness. And that's shameful. And I think it needs to be challenged. It talks about Muslim territories in Europe around 1080, and then it gives a map. The implication of this map is that these are not occupied territories, that these are not conquered territories. So once again, the British Museum is whitewashing history for 21st century political concerns. What I find interesting is that they have plans in October of this year to increase it. I'll just quote to you what's on their display. In October 2018, 2 new galleries focused on the material culture of the Islamic world will be open at the heart of the British Museum next to the European galleries on the upper floor. The galleries will use innovative approaches and technologies to tell the stories of diverse cultures across a wide geographical region from West Africa to Southeast Asia. Now again, I got no problem with the idea of the British Museum giving devoted galleries to the Islamic world. You know, that's part of history, it should be done. But where are the galleries dedicated to the Christian world? I mean, are they trying to suggest by their absence of such galleries that the Christian world was not a thing that existed? That the Christian world was not something that gives us a story of diverse cultures across a wide geographical region? Where is the devoted Christian galleries talking about Christian civilization from Ethiopia in Africa, India and the St. Thomas Christians, Iran and Europe? Where are those galleries? Why is it that when I went into the Islamic gallery, I could find signposted a clear description about the birth of Islam and what Muslims believe? But yet, when I asked the British Museum to show me where I could go to find about the birth of the Christian faith, they sent me to ancient Britain, the galleries concerning ancient Britain. I walked all around them, and I walked all around the medieval gallery, and I found nothing that gave a description about the birth of the Christian faith. I find this most peculiar. It's clear to me, and I think it's clear to most of you, what's happening. 21st century politics is affecting the British Museum in A, how it represents history, and B, where it wishes to put those focuses. I think that it shouldn't go unsaid or unchallenged that there is a political agenda that's affecting the British Museum. Now, all that being said, I want to emphasise again that there's no problem with Islamic galleries. They should be there. But they shouldn't whitewash Islamic history and ignore things like the Islamic slave trade. And if we're going to have Islamic galleries, why don't we also have Christian galleries or Hindu galleries or Sikh galleries or Jewish galleries? Why is it only one religion has a special place of mention, as if the other religions have not contributed anything to society? The linking of Christianity to European civilization is a misrepresentation of the Christian faith, which from early centuries was a global faith in the Middle East, in Africa, in India and Europe as well. And finally, I would like to end by saying that I do encourage people to come to the British Museum. I encourage people to donate to the British Museum. I'm not making this video to attack the British Museum. However, I do encourage you to complain about its biases when you see them and not to remain silent, because it is precisely because we have been silent about our own history and about our own identity and about our own experience of things like Islam and Dhimmitu and the Islamic occupations of Christian lands, that these stories are not being told, and do speak up about demanding a fair representation of the Christian faith, rather than it being linked to European civilization but actually speaking of the Christian faith as something global, like it speaks about Islam. Challenge its biases. There are forms where you can complain, you can speak to the curators, you can speak to the museum. Apparently it does listen, and if that is true, then hopefully they will be responsive to those complaints. My name's
John.
Jan. And yours?
Michaela.
Michaela. So are you from the UK?
America.
America, fantastic. How are you enjoying your holiday?
Really well.
Brilliant. And you've come to the British Museum today. What was your impression of the British Museum?
Oh, beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Definitely.
Really fantastic. What was your favourite room?
I like the Assyria lion hunting room.
Right.
All the walls are all covered in the depictions of them hunting the lions and then bringing it back and everything.
Yeah. And yourself?
That as well as the sarcophagus room, all of the sarcophaguses that are still painted and things like that.
Right, fantastic. And which would you say was the room that least sort of grabbed your attention?
Probably the currency room.
The currency room.
Yeah.
Is that the one with all the coins in?
Yeah, coins
Yeah.
and it just kind of.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. In terms of the impression, like just for some background, do you guys come from any sort of ideological persuasion or religious faith?
Christian.
Christian?
Yeah.
Culturally Christian or practicing Christian? Culturally, and yourself? The same. In terms of how you felt that Christianity was represented in the British Museum, what were your impressions?
I think, it was well represented as well as any other.
Yeah.
faith was.
As well as any other
Yeah.
faith. I'd ask you to comment on the fact that at the British Museum, as you can see from a list of all the rooms that they have, this is a list of all the rooms, and they're all basically by geographical area, and we have only one faith that has a dedicated gallery. Can you guess which faith that's going to be?
Probably Islam.
Yes. Adi, why did you think Islam?
Well, I mean, culturally speaking, that's the basis of most science and math was started by Islamic, so
Yeah.
most of that Middle Eastern, which of course was then wiped out by the Crusades, but that's probably the basis for that.
Okay. Now, in terms of your understanding of the museum, do you think that the museum should be favouring one religious worldview over another religious worldview?
No, but I don't think it does that either. So.
But why would you say then that it has one room that's dedicated to the Islamic world, but say not one that's dedicated to the Christian?
Because the Christian world didn't develop science or math, it was the Islamic world that did that, historically speaking. And then you go have the Roman, of course, that has parts of Christianity, and, where the emperors, started that Christian and started bringing that in. And then you have the Irish Catholic.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not say Christian on any one part, but
Yeah.
I think it's well represented.
Where did you say you said that Christianity wiped out science, Islam started science?
I never said it wiped out.
Yeah, well,
I
you
said
suppressed
it created it.
Islam created it,
Yep, there.
and then the
It
Crusades.
Then the Crusades,
destroyed
and then
it.
that sort of ended that. Yeah, that period.
Where
And you
did you
historically
get
prove that
where-
otherwise.
Where did you get that information?
History books.
History.
Yeah.
And are you not aware of the Byzantine Christian culture and its development of mathematics and science?
How about this? Let me
was
ask you a question.
translated
What's
into
this video
Arabic
for?
as
What
the
is this?
basis?
What is this video for?
This video is to ask people about their impressions of the British Museum
And what's
how
your
it is-
background?
and
or
how it has favoured one religious community.
what's the
over
background
another.
of the video? Who's supporting it or who's putting
It's
it
an
forward?
independent enterprise.
Okay.
It's just an independent enterprise. There's no one backing us. We're doing it ourselves. So my question. You've made a number of statements that I would dispute.
Which ones?
Well, you said that Islam started science and mathematics, and that's just not true at all.
Okay. Our numbering system is based on what they created.
No, the Greek civilization, algebra, these kind of things. The mathematics was something that the Greek culture developed. Actually, in pre-Christian times, and the Christian civilization preserved it, developed it, and then it was translated after the Muslims invaded Christian lands, conquered Christian populations, and then translated those texts, and then they took another step, and then Christians, rather than suppressing that information when they recaptured and liberated places like the Holy Land, they took that information back to Europe. It was translated again back into Latin and was built on again within European civilization. So there's this actual cross-fertilization of knowledge and information. It's not that one culture made it and another culture
So do you
suppressed it.
feel that the Islamic room, have you actually been in and seen the Islamic
I
room?
have, yes. Have
Do
you?
you feel that it's
Have you?
wrong? Do you feel there's anything wrong with it?
No, I think in terms of the room, there's nothing wrong within what it says, except that for instance, it is a whitewashing of the history of Islam. So, for instance, Islam is responsible for the longest lasting and widest slave trade in the history of the world. It still goes on today, and it was started by Muhammad. Now, that's not anywhere within the Islamic gallery.
I mean, there's a whitewashing of most religions.
There's a whitewashing of most religions.
Yeah.
So, in terms
Are you going
of
to say that, finding a way that, those who went out in crusades were great people?
So let's actually look at that. What's your impression of the Crusades?
Kind of dark, crude, dirty.
Right. Are you aware why the Crusades started?
They didn't really like the Islamic.
So you think that the Crusades started because Christians decided that they had a prejudice against Muslims, and so they just invaded their countries?
No, I
So-
mean there's other things going on. Look,
are
I don't
you-
want to do this any longer. I'm on vacation here. I'm not going to debate with you.
That's fine. I would just leave you with this though, that the Crusades were a response to 5 centuries of Islamic aggression. So maybe you need to look again at your history books, because you made a number of counterfactual points to history. Anyway, have a nice day. Enjoy your holiday. Take care.
Thank you. God bless you.
That kind of shows, again, why Christians need to be telling our own story. What we've seen there are two ordinary people, identifying culturally as Christians, who have received from the liberal world a reading of their own history that is entirely negative. Apparently the Crusades were an act of aggression rather than a response to centuries of Islamic aggression, for instance. And this is why, as Christians, we need to be telling our own story, rooted in our own identity. What we have here in the Western Hemisphere is the fact that liberal progressives have rewritten the history of the church in a way that villainizes the church and encourages European populations particularly to disassociate themselves from their own Christian history. And that's not good for our culture. It's not good for our identity. And as Christians, it's actually harmful to us as a church, as a Christian people, if we receive without any filter a reading of our own history, like this American tourist has, where Christianity is villainized as being the opponent of learning and science and mathematics, when actually, in fact, when you read into the history, the Christian faith developed all of those things and did so both before Islam, also due to the cross-cultural fertilization that occurred, and independently of Islam. So, it is a total misreading of history that this American tourist has received from history books, apparently, and is something that has left him in a position where he cannot see an injustice when it lays right before him, and how he has been disassociated to his own Christian history through its villainization. My name's Bob.
Louis.
Louis.
Louis, yeah.
Louis, nice to meet you, Louis. So you've been to the British Museum today?
Yep.
What's been your general impression of the British Museum?
Oh, I think it's amazing to come, It's
Yeah.
beautiful, so, it's so easy to access. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah.
And it's easy to access, and it's really great to see the exhibit.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say was the room that most impacted you, gave you the...
Yeah, I have to say that the God Room really impacted me.
Okay, that was one of the special
It was
exhibitions.
one of the
wasn't
special exhibitions today.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
It's something I enjoyed.
And what would you say was the room that you found least interesting?
It's a tricky one. I really don't say which room I found least interesting, because they're all interesting. I think the one I wouldn't, it was a bit difficult to access the one on top
Yep.
over the stairs, because
Yep.
I came with my mom.
Was that
So-
access due to mobility issues?
Mobility, yeah.
Okay.
So I
fair
think that's the only one. But I think all the rooms were great.
All right. Now, in terms of where would you say you're coming from ideologically, in terms of like a
Yeah, of
worldview
course.
or a faith or?
I believe in God,
Yeah.
and I think that each person has their own name for it,
Yeah.
but there's just one God.
So you're like a multi-faith.
Yeah, multiple.
Multi-faith persuasion. That's fine. Now, in terms of the British Gallery, the British Museum, are you aware that only one religion has its own gallery in the British Museum?
I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. Could you take a guess as to which one you think that might be?
I mean, Christianity probably.
Christianity? What would you say if I said it wasn't Christianity, it's Islam?
Really?
Yeah. If you look inside the British, this is their brochure where they list all the rooms, and the only one that has any kind of
Because I see the Middle East.
yeah, the Middle East, and then you've got one on the Islamic world. But if you look, there's no gallery
What about the others?
for the Christian faith. There's no gallery for the Jewish faith. There's no gallery for the Hindu faith, the Sikh faith.
That's a bit weird.
It's a bit weird, don't you think?
It's
Yeah.
weird.
Now the thing is, you do find artifacts connected to Christianity.
Yeah, because
like-
we have on ancient Rome and
Yeah,
Greece.
you-
You see some from we have Asia.
yeah, and you've got Christianity dispersed within Europe.
Yeah.
But the thing is, rather than take the stuff from the Islamic gallery and disperse it into the Middle East
was created one
and the
specifically for that.
India and Asian subcontinent, you know, they created a special room for the Islamic world.
Why is that?
I am baffled.
I think that's a good question.
I think it is a good question. It seems to me that my personal opinion, my personal interpretation is that politics is at play, and what they're doing is they are creating a special focus based upon 21st century political concerns to give special favours to one community over another. And I just wondered, what's your gut feeling about that? Do you think that's right or wrong?
No, look.
Or do you not think
I
it's a question of right and wrong?
No, I don't think it's a question of right or wrong, but it's a question of why would it be just one?
Yeah, that is exactly the question that
Yeah,
we're
because look, Jewish religion has been far longer than Islamic religion.
Yeah, that's true,
And,
historically.
Historically, it has.
Yeah.
Even Christianity, actually. Christianity is what, 2,000 years?
600 years older.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So I know it's 2,000 years old, and Islam came about 8,700, I think, or 8,300.
Yeah. It was It was in the 600s.
The 600s, right?
The
So,
Islamic, yeah. So
wow.
I mean that's just a thought that I would
Excuse
leave you with. I mean, and
I'm gonna go for another round.
yeah, and
Because I didn't pay attention.
Go back around, and I would encourage you maybe to mention that to the British Museum, that they have given special favours to one religion over and above other religions, and have done so in a way that well, it doesn't do itself justice as an
No, of course,
institution
I
of
think
history.
there is so much more to see
Yeah,
of other religions. That's why I'm multifaceted religion. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
follow anyone. They all, they all profess the same thing.
Yeah.
But to give play of one over the other is just weird.
yeah, exactly. I agree. Anyway,
Okay.
have a lovely
Thanks,
day.
Bob.
Take
I
care.
think thanks for raising that. I
Yeah.
didn't think of it.
Have a think about it, Luke.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye. My name is Bob.
Hi Bob, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Piers.
Piers and Denise. How did you find the British Museum today?
I loved it.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Okay, explore, expand.
I've always been really interested in the Scythians,
Yep.
and so it was really great to have an opportunity to finally go to a show and actually see the things that I'd seen online for
Right.
a long time.
That's one of the special exhibitions.
That's the special exhibition. I
Yeah.
went.
Fantastic. Was it good value for money?
I thought so. I mean, there are a lot of people, but it's also the second to last day,
Okay, fantastic.
so people are crowded and they're trying to see it before it goes.
And yourself, Denise? Did you-
Yeah, we went out together.
And out
Well,
of
I didn't know much about it beforehand, so he basically dragged me into it, but
Okay.
it was really
good, good. And out of all the rooms that you've been in, I probably know your answer now. But out of all the rooms that you've been in, which was the one that left you, that gave you the biggest impact, the one that you'll go away and stick in your mind?
You like the Enlightenment.
I did really like that light.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's ground floor.
And the one that you found the least interesting, the one that left you a bit sort of like, let's move on.
Well, I'm kind of the boring one who always picks the frilly gold stuff from the 1700s as being
A bit boring.
not that exciting.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And yourself?
Not for me. I like the golden stuff. No, to be honest, like I had a really good experience.
Okay. Now, I am leading this interview to a particular thing that I want to ask people about. But before I do, I just want to know a little bit about your own sort of background. Ideologically, in terms of like a world view, whether it be a faith or a philosophy, where would you say that you're coming from?
Why don't you start with that one?
I don't have much of a. I mean, I didn't grow up religious or anything. So
Okay.
I had a very, very atheist upbringing.
Atheist
And-
upbringing? Okay.
Yeah. And in terms of ideology or worldview, do I have a worldview? I'll listen to Piers for
Probably,
that. He'll give you
normally
a very,
my
very
experience by
effective-
default, if people can't identify their own worldview, it usually means they're liberal, secular.
Okay, in that case, I'm
That's
probably
an
liberal
assumption,
secular.
but in my experience, that's usually the default position that most people fall into. And yourself?
As far as sort of faith and ideology comes, I'm part of a, I suppose, growing group of Americans that call themselves sort of culturally Jewish.
Yeah.
Not, an everyday sort of worship kind of person, but that's the background I'm coming from.
Sure.
And I do modern Middle Eastern studies.
Okay.
So I am a sort of firm believer in the interconnectedness of
Yeah.
everyone and trying to learn about people's cultures
Fantastic.
and discovering what bit of the cultures that we all share.
Fantastic. In terms of the British Museum, would it surprise you to know that out of all the world religions, only one religion is given its own gallery inside the British Museum?
Is that the
Would
Islamic
that
art?
Yeah. Does that strike you as strange?
It surprises me there isn't a Buddhist group.
Yeah.
True, in terms like, yeah, a lot of religions have special art connected to it. of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
So why do you think that the British Museum has given just like we can look at? I've got the list here. This is the British Museum's own map. It's its own brochure. As you can see, the world's divided into different regions in the world. So you've got a Middle Eastern region, but then there's also a gallery dedicated to the Islamic world. Now, my question is, and you might ask the same question you said about Buddhism. Why isn't there a gallery for the Buddhist world?
Yeah.
Why is there only one for the Islamic world? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I have two thoughts on that. The first is, I guess you can make the argument as far as separating Islam out from the ancient Middle East that because of the, art sort of drastic artistic changes that you see with the Islamic, the Arab invasion of the rest of the Middle East and the change towards sort of really real calligraphy-based art, that sort of that merits its own sort of break in terms of saying, and now the art changes. But as far as not having a Buddhist room or something like that,
I mean, don't you think, as I do, that Buddhism is every bit a world religion that's influenced civilization? That if we're going to have an Islamic world, which I have no problem with an Islamic gallery, but if we're going to have an Islamic gallery, why can't we have a Buddhist gallery then? A room dedicated to Buddhism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of.
Is that unfair?
I'm happy with the museum, but I'd be happy to see that added to it.
Yeah.
I guess it wasn't something where I sort of left going, it's strange that that's not there, but once you say it, you sort of go, I mean, that.
It doesn't. It hits it. You don't think about it until someone points it out, but then it suddenly
that's true.
strikes
But
you as a bit.
along the same line, same argument, I probably wouldn't have missed the Islamic world room if it wasn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair. For me personally, it's a case of either have a special gallery for all the world's religions, either put one room together that's got them all in, or have a room that's dedicated to Islam, to Buddhism, to Hinduism,
But like also
or
in the rest
don't
of
have
the
an Islamic gallery.
exhibitions, like they do have some religious elements, like
Absolutely.
like not special rooms dedicated to them. So
Precisely. So, like
I-
the European
yeah.
gallery, for instance, it's full of Christian artifacts, absolutely chocker full of Christian artifacts. But it's under the European gallery. So why couldn't they take the Islamic gallery and just put that in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense that, but as I said, because there's a sort of sharp jump in some cases in terms of the way that the art changes. I see a sort of sense in that separation.
Yeah.
But it'll be. I think. I mean, a lot of the I'd say thing with that is that Islam's just a sort of more modern religion. So there's that element of sort of you can really say it's been since the sort of 600s that you've got this, versus Buddhism, which stretches so far back that it becomes a lot murkier to try and separate out. A Buddhist period from another period.
But
where
you're talking
the
about
art
1400 years within Islam. That's not,
but I mean the Islamic
that's
world
something that
stuff
you could-
generally just means 600 to 1800.
Yeah, exactly. But I think for me, it's this presentation that we're talking of an Islamic world rather than say an Arab civilization or an Indian subcontinent civilization or a Persian civilization, each of which took Islam and took it to their own and made it in to some degree within their own image.
Yeah.
But yet we're represented with this idea of some kind of monolithic Islamic world.
Well, I guess that's the challenge you have in a Buddhist room too, right?
But there is no Buddhist room.
No, but that's what I mean.
And there is no
that
Christian
sort of-
room. and there is no Jewish room.
Yeah.
I mean, the Jewish faith is one of the oldest faiths in the history of the world, and it has been one of the touchstones upon which European civilization is built on, and you can't find a Jewish room.
Yeah.
But we can find an Islamic room.
Yeah, I guess that comes down to the collection, right? But hopefully they'll be able to add stuff like that in the future.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Do you think that the British Museum, what do you think the British Museum should do with regards to this? Should they, and I'll give you options, should they A, create a room where all the world's religions are represented, B, create rooms where all the world's major religions have their own special focus, or C, get rid of the Islamic world, or some other alternative option?
Well,
What's your thought?
I'm in favour of more museums, so more rooms.
More rooms. So Christianity should have a room, Buddhism should have a room, Judaism should have
Well, I think, the challenge in these cases, and in the Islamic room, is how do you separate them? What is Christianity? Is it, Catholicism? Is it
Yeah.
Protestantism? In these general senses. I think also in a place like England, Christianity is sort of so present. In many ways, I think part of the advantage of, now admittedly, Britain is changing demographically, but I think part of the sort of advantages of having a sort of a Jewish room, a Hindu room, a Buddhist room, is to show what is still the majority of the British public, sort of the other religions of the world.
Yeah.
But I think having multiple rooms wouldn't be a bad thing.
So multiple rooms from you, and what's your opinion?
Yeah, well, I could see the argument going for multiple rooms to put some more religious in, but on the other hand, I don't really see the British Museum as a sort of religious focused museum.
Yeah.
So for me, I guess I would be very happy with sort of sticking to the original situation of things, to keep it under the different continents and have the religious artifacts sort of embedded.
Yeah. So you would take away the Islamic world and just distribute the artifacts amongst the various different geographical areas, like they do with the
although,
Christian.
in principle, I don't see anything wrong with having an Islam room.
Yeah.
And
And as we're saying, it's sort of a standard way of doing museums. I've seen plenty of museums that have a sort of Islamic room because the religion comes with this very sort of distinctive calligraphic art style, which I suppose part of the point in those rooms is also to show a religious point at which these different continents meet.
Yeah.
That you've got a sort of art form which, while it changes based on the different places, is united by the elements of scripture that appear in it.
Yeah.
Although I suppose you could do the same for Christianity.
Well, exactly. And as I've said before, for me, there's no problem in having an Islamic world room. There's no problem in having that gallery.
Yeah.
But there is a problem if you have it in isolation. That's the issue for me. That you've got one religion that is clearly favoured by a venerable institution like the British Museum. That's relying on people's goodwill, and they have, I think, prostituted their position in our society due to 21st century political concerns to emphasise one religion over others when they could have created something much more equal.
As a Jew, I didn't feel that I was being de-emphasised, though. It's simply that.
As a Christian, I did.
Okay.
As a Christian, I did.
Well, I saw a lot of crosses on a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's sort of the thing, is that the Christianity is very spread out and omnipresent, especially within the British Museum's collection. There's so much sort of ancient European and modern European work which has it on it.
Yeah.
And so I suppose I don't sense that Christianity isn't being represented. It simply doesn't have a room where it's all being
But
brought
the
together.
thing is, Christianity is a global faith that existed in Ethiopia, India, the Middle East, as well as Europe, and and we said Ethiopia and Africa. So the idea of connecting Christianity just to Europe, I mean, as European rooms, they should definitely have Christianity in there because Christianity is part of the history of Europe. But to conflate European culture with Christianity as if these two things are synonyms.
Well, there's certainly Christian things in the African rooms as well.
Yeah, but what I'm saying to you is that they are, my point, if you're making the argument that the Islamic, if we make the argument that the Islamic gallery is there because there is something distinctive about Islam that can be traced through different cultures, then that same line of logic would mean you'd create a Christian room because the same things can be found. in different cultures that have Christianity as their root.
Like, wouldn't you say that the European sections are so spread up into different time periods? And I feel that like the Christian artifacts are very clearly connected to like the time
Yeah.
periods in which they arose.
Yeah.
Whereas the Middle East room, I mean, you don't really see that elaborate sort of division in different time periods. So it would be harder to place those artifacts into different time periods.
Well, I mean,
I
the
think
thing is
that's-
that it would go from the 7th century onwards. wouldn't it?
Well, I think there's a good argument to be made there that I think in many ways what having an Islamic room represents is the fact that the Middle Eastern section, with the exception of sort of ancient Mesopotamia,
Yeah.
is quite denuded of objects from more recent periods.
Absolutely.
And that were you to have a large Middle East section, which was to say match the scale of the European section,
Yeah.
then you might more easily be able to spread the objects out.
Yeah.
But as it is, what the collection reflects is a sort of breakage of the ancient Middle East and then suddenly, well, it's not arbitrarily chosen, but sort of the Islamic period until now.
Yeah.
And if you had
exactly,
that
like-
greater regional diversity within the Middle East section, then perhaps you could have a model which follows the Christian example, of spreading things out to more accurately represent the exact time and place that it's coming from.
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic argument. I'm not necessarily persuaded by it, but it's really great to meet someone who has such a love for museums. Just as I've got a love for the British Museum, such a love for it that I actually I come here and I find myself a little bit niggled by this, that I actually want to try and do something about it. So thank you so much for
Yeah,
your
thank you
time.
very much.
It's been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Nice meeting you.
You have a really lovely
Thanks,
day.
you too.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you
too.
so much for your views, and we'll point them on, and you look after yourself.
Yeah.
My name's Bob. What's your
Hi,
name?
Katerina.
Katerina
Yes,
and
it's about Freddie.
Freddie. Freddie. Okay. You just visited the British Museum today.
Yes.
What's your impressions?
Well, I think we both really liked it.
Yes.
They have a great, a lot of different statues and so on. So
There's
great
a lot to
variety.
see, and the people around us so happy and so nice and kindly and friendly. So overall, a really good,
A really great experience.
yeah,
I think.
good day.
And I think it's so nice to have such different nationalities. You really get to learn a lot.
Some European and
Asia.
Yeah.
Europe and a lot of stuff.
Fantastic. And in terms of which room gave you the strongest impression? So we just have to move out of the way for this badly driven taxi.
For me, I think
The Egyptian,
The Egyptian
yes,
left the strongest impression.
yes,
Yeah.
a lot. And I don't know why, but maybe because I just love Egypt.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing how it all worked. And yeah.
The pyramids and all of that.
Yes.
And yourself?
Yeah, I think it's quite hard because it's really a great museum, but I think maybe the Asian part, because I don't think we have in Denmark a lot about it, so we don't know so much about the culture and the way the religion works and so on. To see all the statues and paintings and so on about it, it was really great.
That's great. And which room would you say was like the least interesting, the one that we walked through?
Some of the Greek.
Yes.
Not all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's
I agree,
a lot
I
of
agree.
a lot of different parts when you don't just walk past.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that the same for you? Or?
Yeah, I think it's the same, but overall I still think it was a good room, you could say that. But yeah, I don't know.
We really liked the book part
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
It was kind of Disney-ish, so that was really great. Yeah.
Right. The book part, which
Yeah, there was a big room where it was kind of like a library.
Yeah.
was it the Enlightenment
Yeah, I
section?
think so.
Yeah.
It was really
Sounds
nice.
like it might be the Enlightenment.
A lot of books with a lot of different texts and different
And
histories
languages.
and yeah.
That sounds like it might be the Enlightenment
Yeah.
section. So I am leading this interview somewhere. There is a particular question that I want to ask you. But before I do that, I just need to get a bit about your sort of background, your ideological worldview, whether it be a faith or a
Okay.
philosophy. How would you describe yourself in terms of the position that you're coming?
Well, you think how society works or how as a person?
So in terms of if you had a faith, you might say Buddhist, Christian, Hindu,
yeah, okay,
Jewish.
yeah.
If it were just a philosophy, you might say liberal.
Yeah, I'm not
Nihilist.
so liberal. I'm more social.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in a certain religion, but I do accept it, and I think some of the principles for different religion is very important and beautiful too. So I think that I try to live by them, but not like extremely.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say I was Christian. In Denmark, we use the term cultural Christian.
Yeah,
We call it
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And
It's a
I
term
think-
that needs to catch on in the
Yeah,
UK.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I would consider myself as that. Yeah.
Okay, and yourself?
Yeah, I'm Christian, but
Would you say cultural Christian or practicing Christian?
cultural, yes.
Cultural.
Yes.
So you have a connection to the history, but not necessarily
Yes.
to the beliefs and the
We don't
values.
go to the church
No,
every Sunday.
All right.
Only at
Would it-
Christmas. Yeah.
Would it surprise you that the British Museum has singled out one religion to have its own special gallery above any other?
Sounds very discriminated.
It sounds very
Yeah,
discriminatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to take a guess which religion that is?
Well, the easiest question, like the easiest answer would be Christianity.
But I don't think so. Maybe
I don't know.
I don't think the Christian
Islam? I'm not sure.
Okay.
or Buddhism. It's called that Buddhism.
Islam or Buddhism
Yeah.
or Christianity or Buddhism?
Yeah.
So the actual answer is Islam.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, I don't know how you feel about this personally. I mean, I am a Christian. I do have issues with this.
Yeah.
The British Museum, as you can see, it splits its display up into different parts of the world. You've got the entire geography of the world collected.
Nothing about the.
But then you have one room that's dedicated to the Islamic world.
We don't even see that.
Now, how do you feel about the fact that the British Museum has given one gallery to the Islamic world, but you don't find one on Buddhism, you don't find one on Christianity?
I think maybe it's a shame because
Yeah, it's a shame because there's a lot
they have a lot of everything, but as I see now, they don't have anything about the Islam.
They've got a room.
Yeah,
Well,
one
I
room,
think
but
it's a shame, but I don't think many of us know so much about
Yeah.
Islamic
Yeah.
culture. So
Yeah.
maybe it's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think it's a shame that they can't expand like
Yeah.
that kind of religion.
So, because I mean, it was interesting before we said that the room was the Islamic room. Your first instinct was to say it sounded a bit discriminatory, and I would agree with you.
Yeah.
You know, as a Christian walking
Yeah.
through the British Museum, I can't speak for Buddhists, and I can't speak for Jews, and I can't speak for other groups. I can only speak for myself. But I do find it sad, really, that one religion has been singled out above all others. And for me, the British Museum should either be establishing one room that covers all the world's major religions, or give each of the world's major religions their own room.
But also because it's called the British Museum, so it should represent Britain in some kind of way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or to take the artifacts within the Islamic world and distribute them into the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent and in the Iranian, which would mean all the artifacts are still there, but they would be treated like all the Christian artifacts that you find in the European section of the library. And I personally find it strange that the British Museum
You don't
has.
know why.
Well, I have sought an answer, but none of the staff have any idea why. Obviously, they all just said to me that I need to go and speak to the managers and such. But I just think in terms of ourselves, it is something that we should be speaking up about. It's kind of like we're being asked to accept a special treatment of one group above another.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You know,
Yeah.
you either treat everyone the same or you don't.
Yeah.
And the very act of discrimination is when you favour one group above another group. And that's what the British Museum is doing, which is illiberal, and I feel it's prostituting its venerable position in our society for 21st century political concerns. You know, and what's your thought on those comments? You either agree, disagree, or you've got your own ideas?
I do agree. I don't think, I respect your opinion, but I don't think it's that serious in some kind of way, because I think there's a lot of attention on Europe in general and so on, and I think the Islamic culture in particular gets very discriminated by so many people around the world who think, okay, you're brown, you're terrorist, like that.
Yeah.
So I don't, in particular this case, I don't find it so much annoying, if you can call it that. But I do think, like you say, you should treat all kind of religion and all kind of people equal.
Yep.
So that I do agree, but in this case, I'm not find it so extremely.
Yeah. And I agree with you. We you know, that there is a need to challenge Islamophobia where it exists. It absolutely does exist, and it absolutely must be challenged. But at the same time, there's also a great deal of Christophobia that exists within society that should be challenged as well. And it also, Christophobia exists to a great extent in the Middle East, you know, where Christians are treated as second-class citizens and they're persecuted in a much more violent way and in a much more harsh way than any kind of examples of Islamophobia that we could sort of point to here in Western Europe. You know, and it just seems to me that we're being asked to buy into a political narrative that diminishes our own identity, that diminishes, particularly, I am a practicing Christian, so it diminishes my Christianity as a way of life, as a civilization. And sort of says that this is a thing that Europeans used to do in the past. You know, but doesn't seem to realise that actually Christianity was a global faith that existed in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and India, all by the 3rd century. You know, and it's worthy of a Christian world gallery as well. And you know, if we're creating an Islamic room to sort of to show the other side of the coin, that actually, you know, the stereotype and the characterization that some of the more tabloid press buy into about, you know, the sort of the terrorist. You know, if we're using that as a justification for the Islamic gallery, then surely that means that we should have a Christian gallery to challenge the Christophobia that's being practiced in the Middle East, and to highlight the fact that Christians are being persecuted in the Middle East. You know.
Yeah, I think all in all it's about representing history.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
representing the whole world.
Yeah, so
And not just some part of the world.
yeah, because I think you can shrink it down to that. So it's not about like what you think opinion, but in the end it's about the museum representing the history and what people have believed and still believe in.
And what they do and what they have done.
Yeah, so I
You
think
know.
I would look at it in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I do agree with you, but because I'm not a practicing Christian, practicing, it's kind of hard to be like annoyed by it, but I do get it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
It was a real pleasure interviewing you. Really great
too.
opinions.
Thank you.
You. Have a lovely day. Are you both here as on a holiday?
Yeah.
How long are you in the UK?
Just a weekend.
We came yesterday.
Just a weekend. Oh,
yeah,
fantastic.
so
Right.
it's
A lot to fill in.
We're going home tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. So I hope you guys have a really lovely time.
Thank you.
Enjoy your holiday and take the very best care of yourselves.
Thank you.
So we've done a number of interviews, and it is the case clearly from the snapshot of people that we're doing. It's not scientific, of course, but it would be fair, I think, to say that most people go into the British Museum with a great deal of trust, assuming that the British Museum is going to be fair, without ever questioning its integrity. But then when you point out to them that there is this special favour that's given to one religion above all others, that strikes them as being unfair, and they you know, we've seen that from the interviews, that people are saying that there is something unfair about it, and we would invite everyone who visits the British Museum, and we do invite you to visit the British Museum, and we do invite you to donate and to support the British Museum, but when you do so, don't do it undress this favouritism that's so clearly coming through in the way that they've organised their museum, and to tell them essentially to stop being political and just to represent history, as opposed to using 21st century political concerns of the day to decide how they're going to establish their museum and what kind of message they're going to put across. Just tell history. That's what you're here for.